The short film Identities, released last month on Nebula, tells the story of two people, both named Aaron, though each spells it differently, who find themselves standing in a room with no memory of who they are or how they got there. That's the starting point. As the story unfolds from there, Aaron and Aaron discover more about who they are, where they are, and what they can do about it. That's all I'll say about it for right now, but I am going to get into spoiler territory eventually, so if you haven't seen Identities yet and you were planning on watching it, bear that in mind. This will not be a review of Identities per se. The film is written and directed by Jesse Earl, also known here on YouTube as Jesse Gender, and Jesse and I are friends, and personally, I make it a rule not to review movies made by my friends. Granted, this is the first time it's ever come up, but that doesn't make it a bad rule. Instead of reviewing the movie, I want to take a look at the films and TV shows that came before that share story elements in common with Identities. Like every story you're ever likely to watch or read or listen to, Identities is derivative. Usually when we use that term in a critical context, it's a bad thing, meant to indicate lack of creativity, but that's not how I mean it here. Every creative work is derivative of an earlier work in one way or another, and usually in lots of ways. In the book of Ecclesiastes, it says, "There is nothing new under the sun." And that book was written between 2100 and 2500 years ago, and whoever wrote that line had probably heard it before from someone else, so you get what I'm saying. One of the great thrills of writing and consuming fiction, particularly genre fiction, I think Identities comfortably fits into the sci-fi category, is discovering new twists or fresh takes on well-worn setups and ideas. It's part of being creative, not imagining something completely new, which was almost impossible, but taking the familiar and doing something new and unexpected with it. Identities tells a specific story, a personal story, a story that is pertinent to our current political and social moment, and it does so from a starting premise that is probably very familiar to most of the audience. The website TV Tropes, which indexes and describes commonly used concepts, plots, character types, etc., lists the initial premise of Identities under the title, "You Wake Up in a Room." So many works have made use of this premise that I'm not going to even attempt to address them all. Instead, I'm going to talk about the three examples that came most immediately to my mind when I watched Identities. I haven't talked to Jessie about this. I don't know how many of these she has seen. I suspect most, if not all of them, but I don't know. But that's not really the point. I'm not trying to figure out what the direct inspirations for Identities were. I'm examining the ways in which different works by different authors working in different eras offer variations on the same theme. The first example that always comes to my mind when I think of the "you wake up in a room" trope is 5 Characters in Search of an Exit, an episode from the 3rd season of the original Twilight Zone, written by Rod Serling, directed by Lamont Johnson, based on a short story, The Depository, by Marvin Peddle, originally broadcast December 22nd, 1961. The episode centers on, I hope I'm not giving too much away, 5 characters: a hobo, a bagpiper, a ballerina, a clown, and an army major. They are trapped in an undecorated circular room with a smooth wall that stretches up to an opening too high up for any of them to reach. None of them has any memory of how they got here, who they are, or what their lives were like before they arrived. The plot of the episode, such as it is, consists mostly of the characters' struggles to find answers to the mysteries that confront them in this place, and ultimately their efforts to escape. One of the greatest strengths of the "you wake up in a room" trope is that it places characters in a situation that inherently demands that they ask certain questions and attempt certain actions. If you found yourself trapped in a room with other people and none of you knew how you got there or who anyone else was or who you were yourselves, you'd try to figure out who you were, who the others were, what you were doing here, and where and what here is, wouldn't you? If you were stuck in that room long enough, you'd probably try to figure a way out, too. The premise is specific enough to suggest certain narrative avenues, but broad enough to allow each individual writer to flesh out the details with their own imagination and point of view. Plus, you start the story on a note of mystery. Mystery is inherent to the premise, and it's a mystery just as much to the audience as to the characters. We want to know who they are, where they are, how they got here, and why. We want to know what's going on. In this example, the 5 characters learned that they didn't all arrive at the same time. The Major was the last to show up. They also realized that their captors, whoever their captors might be, never visit, never communicate with them, and never feed them. But despite this, none of them are ever hungry. There seems to be no reason for them to be in this place. As the clown puts it at one point, singing to the tune of Auld Lang Syne, "We're here because we're here, because we're here, because we're here." The only way in or out of the room is the big hole at the top. So once they give up on trying to answer their questions of who, where, and why, the 5 characters combine their efforts to attempt to reach the top. After an initial failure, they manage to form a tower with their bodies standing on each other's shoulders against the wall, and the Major manages to climb out. It's at that point that he and we discover the shocking truth. Spoiler alert in case you haven't seen this classic episode of a 60-year-old TV show. You ready? You sure? Okay. These characters aren't human beings. They're toys. Dolls. The entire time we've been watching dolls who were deposited in a bin run by a charity collecting toys for Christmas. It's a fantastical solution to the mystery, but a simple one that explains everything and makes perfect sense given that this is, after all, the Twilight Zone. A more absurdist variation on the trope, also made for TV, is an episode of the Anthology series NBC Experiment in Television, which originally aired on February 23, 1969. It's produced, directed, and co-written by Jim Henson. Yes, that Jim Henson. And it's called The Cube. Unlike 5 Characters in Search of an Exit, which centers on 5 characters, or Identities, which centers initially on 2 characters, The Cube centers on 1 character. A man who is trapped alone in a white cubicle room. Like the protagonists in 5 Characters and Identities, the man in the cube doesn't know who he is, where he is, or how he got here. Unlike the 5 characters in the Twilight Zone who are never visited by anyone from outside their confinement, the man in the cube finds his prison to be a pretty busy place. From the beginning, he is interacting with all sorts of characters who enter the cube, carry out whatever business they've come to do, and then exit. There's a handyman, a woman who claims to be the man in the cube's wife, a man who claims to be the manager of the establishment, cops who appear to carry out a search warrant and discover evidence that the man in the cube is a prolific thief, spy, and kidnapper, a scruffy-looking fellow prisoner who seems to enter from an adjacent cube, who is then revealed to just be an actor playing the role of a fellow prisoner, a child who rides a tricycle and sings a song mocking the man and declaring that he'll never get out, and there are many more than just those examples. No matter who the visitors are or how consequential their visits appear to be at the time, they all leave after a few minutes at most, and once they're gone, it's mostly as though they were never there to begin with. The cops do leave the man in the cube handcuffed for a bit, and a few of the other visitors leave behind objects, some of which are inexplicably stained with strawberry jam, but those never last very long either. The outsiders are able to freely enter and exit the cube, but whenever the man in the cube tries to follow them out, he can never find the door they used. To him, the walls of the cube are always solid and closed. Ultimately, the man attempts to end his life using a gun that has been left in the cube, but when he pulls the trigger, the gun just shoots ink in his face. Then, all of the characters who have visited him over the last hour, or however long it's been, return, leaving the door open as they gather in the cube. They laugh and tell the man this has all been a joke. The man is not amused. He tells them that no matter who they are or what they do, there's one thing he knows for sure. He is real. And he walks out of the cube as the others applaud. Another manager type meets the man in the hallway outside the cube and leads him to an office to sign his release, the manager type explains. While sitting in the office, the man accidentally cuts himself. The manager type invites the man to taste his own blood, and when he does, the man finds that his blood is strawberry jam. The office fades away around him, and the man is back inside the cube, which he apparently never left. That's where we leave him, trapped, perhaps forever, in a void where nothing, even his own existence, seems real. Though its tone is overall much more comedic than 5 Characters in Search of an Exit, The Cube ends up as by far the darker of the two pieces. The absurdism of The Cube plays over a continuous hum of bleakness. The silliness on display is but a thin mask for the existential horror of it all. At least the 5 characters in the Twilight Zone episode have each other, and the hope that they, being dolls, will soon become the treasured possessions of children. The man in the cube is just there, all alone, permanently, denied even the small comfort of knowing why this is happening. Almost 30 years later, another project, a theatrical film this time, made use of this trope in a way similar to The Cube. So similar, it even has kinda the same title, Cube. The film is directed by Vincenzo Natali, written by Natali, Andrei Bajelic, and Graham Manson, and features an ensemble cast which includes Nicole DeBoer. A familiar face to me and my fellow Trekkies, she plays Ezri Dax in the final season of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Cube opened in theaters in September of 1998 and was successful enough to spawn several sequels, but I'm only going to talk about the first one. Despite spending most of its runtime following 5 characters in Search of an Exit, Cube differs from that Twilight Zone episode and Jim Henson's The Cube in some important ways. In this variation of the you wake up in a room trope, the characters retain their memories of who they are and what their lives were like before arriving, though they don't remember how they were brought here or by whom, or for what purpose. The nature of their confinement is also different and more complex. Though they all find each other in the opening minutes of the film, each protagonist starts out alone in their own cubicle cell. They are able to leave one cube and enter adjoining cubes through doors built into each of the 6 sides of each cubicle room, 4 walls, floor, and ceiling. There is a catch. There are several catches, actually, which the characters discover as they make their way from cube to cube, but the first catch is that some of the cubes are booby-trapped, and entering them means certain death. They find ways to determine which rooms are trapped and which ones aren't, and they learn other crucial facts about their situation, like that these interconnected cubicle rooms are just building blocks forming a much larger cube, but the most important developments have to do with themselves as individuals, and the greatest threat they face turns out to be interpersonal conflict. Unlike 5 characters in Search of an Exit and The Cube, who the characters of Cube are is extremely relevant to the story. Their jobs, their political and philosophical viewpoints, their personalities, all these factors come to bear on the narrative in a significant way. Quentin is a cop who takes charge of the group, but also has a temper and an inflated sense of his own competence. Levin is a student with a math background who is able to devise methods of avoiding trapped rooms and estimating their relative position in the larger cube using numbers engraved on the frame of each door. Holloway is a doctor, but also a conspiracy theorist who believes the cube to be the sinister product of the military-industrial complex. She and Quentin don't get along. Kazan is a savant whose natural facility with numbers also comes in handy, but whose intellectual challenges test the patience and the character of the others. And Worth is a cynic who eventually reveals that he designed the outer structure of the cube complex, though he knows nothing about the inner workings in which they are all imprisoned. Cube resolves its story in a slightly different way than either 5 characters or The Cube as well. The ending doesn't come with a surreal or cruel Serling-esque twist, although it is a brutal ending nonetheless. 5 characters may be in search of an exit, but not all 5 make it there, you know what I'm saying? Same basic premise, 3 unique works that each explore and expand on that premise in their own creative directions. They aren't the only works that make use of this trope. There are many more, but they're fairly well known, and they're similar enough to and different enough from each other so as to demonstrate what a useful trope you wake up in a room is. So what about Identities? Where does writer-director Jessie Earl take this premise? And more importantly, what does she use it to say? As you might reasonably assume from the title, the identities of the main characters matter a great deal in Identities. Who they are, specifically, and how they relate to each other is not just relevant to the story, it essentially is the story. Aaron and Aaron wake up in their cell, also a nondescript cube like the one the man finds himself inside of in the cube, and the first things they notice are each other. They busy themselves with the same kind of tasks the characters in the previously discussed works do. They explore the room, look for possible exits, speculate as to who brought them here and why, but their first breakthrough comes through talking to each other about themselves and realizing that they can remember their names and that they have the same name. From that point forward, their surroundings become a bit more generous with details regarding the nature of their situation. Aaron and Aaron are shown a video explaining that they are digital avatars inside the virtual reality platform of a corporation where the flesh and blood human they are meant to represent has recently been hired. They learn that this room in which they've been trapped is a representation of the VR platform's onboarding process. The user is supposed to choose either Aaron with an A, the man, or Aaron with an E, the woman, and then move on to the next step. Two doors appear in the room, but not at the same time. When Aaron with an A approaches his door, the door on Aaron with an E's side of the room vanishes, and vice versa. Aaron and Aaron realize that only one of them is meant to get out of the room. Our heroes do not accept that, however. Faced with a binary choice that neither one of them is happy with, Aaron and Aaron find a way to choose the third option. Though technically separated from one another by a force field that runs down the middle of the room, Aaron and Aaron find that if they touch the force field in the same spot at the same time, kind of like when Kirk and Spock both do the Vulcan salute against the glass in Star Trek II right before Spock dies, well, Kirk kind of does it. The point is they put them on the glass, their hands. That's what Aaron and Aaron do, only it's not glass, it's a force field. And when they do that, both doors are visible at the same time, and they both exit the room they woke up in. That's not the end, though. While the stories of 5 characters in search of an exit and the cube play out entirely or almost entirely within the spaces in which the characters initially find themselves, Identities, like Cube, follows its characters after they escape their original surroundings. Just as the characters in Cube are still stuck in a maze of interconnected cubes after they leave their first cubes, Aaron and Aaron are still at the mercy of the masters of the virtual reality world after they manage to get out of that first room. The new wrinkle Identities introduces to the premise is what happens once Aaron and Aaron walk through those doors. They emerge on the other side not as 2 separate individuals, but as one person. The combination of Aaron and Aaron. Remember, only one of them was supposed to be able to leave. This new person, Aaron, spelled A-E-R-I-N, appears to the administrator in the next room, who is completely flummoxed since she was expecting either Aaron with an A or Aaron with an E. This new non-binary Aaron decides that they, them are the best pronouns to use when referring to them, since while they are an amalgam of male Aaron and female Aaron, they don't fit into either the male or female category. And things proceed from there. Another administrator appears, splits NB Aaron back into Aaron with an A and Aaron with an E again. Aaron and Aaron are interrogated separately in an attempt to ascertain what's gone wrong with the system and to convince Aaron and Aaron that only one of them is supposed to be here, that NB Aaron, Aaron with an A and an E, is not an option. But in the end, that's the only option Aaron and Aaron will accept. And they recombine into NB Aaron, who moves on to another level of the VR world while the administrators scramble to figure out what to do in response. And that's where the movie ends. Obviously, Identities consists of more than just this one trope. It, like all stories, makes use of numerous tropes, nor is its story inspired by a single work or a single category of works. I detect more than a dash of The Matrix in there, and I imagine that's a connection many viewers of Identities will make right away. And like I said earlier, Jessie Earl and I are buddies, but I haven't discussed this with her, so I have no idea which of the other works I've talked about in this video she drew inspiration from, if any. The themes and ideas of Identities, the explorations of queer identity and of living outside the classical gender binary, the depiction of non-binary people breaking that traditional gender paradigm as a healthy and necessary thing. Those are all more important to the story and the message of Identities than its starting premise, and none of those themes or ideas are specifically present in 5 Characters in Search of an Exit or The Cube or Cube. But as a self-described writer and critic myself, something I really appreciate about Identities is the way it takes that starting premise, the you wake up in a room trope, and adapts it into the perfect vehicle for what Jesse wants to say. Questions of identity come into play in those earlier works. Who am I, or who are we, are questions that the protagonists of both 5 Characters and The Cube ask in some form. Where are we, and how did we get here, and how do we get out, are questions to which the protagonists of 5 Characters, The Cube, and Cube all want answers. Aaron and Aaron want answers to those questions too, but in Identities, those questions and their answers are interwoven with each other and are responsible for the predicament in which Aaron and Aaron find themselves when they wake up in the room. The company explains it as a glitch in the system, but the glitch is NB Aaron's existence as a non-binary person, which the system was not built to accommodate. That's why Aaron with an A and Aaron with an E are in the room in the first place. That's why they can't just leave. In this version of the trope, the heroes are required not merely to overcome an obstacle or navigate a maze in order to escape, they must defy an unjust system. A system which is telling them they have to be someone they know they are not. Aaron and ultimately Aaron, get out of the room by embracing their identity, by forcing the system that initially trapped them to accept them for who they truly are. The you wake up in a room trope is among my favorite story setups. It doesn't always yield a good story, but I am automatically curious every time I encounter it. There's just something inherently compelling about it. For me, the most effective component of Identities is how it uses the trope not merely to structure the plot, but to guide the characterizations, to communicate the themes, to amplify virtually everything else about the story, including, most importantly, what I read to be the central message of the work. Any system that excludes or marginalizes people based on their innate traits, including their gender identity, cannot be just and should not be acceptable to any of us. And if you should ever wake up in a room with no clue where it is and no recollection of how you got there, as you begin to find your way out, bear in mind that the first and most essential step you can take in that situation is to remember who you are.